He didn't mean to keep a running tally, but the acts themselves were so brazen, so utterly devoid of respect for boundaries, that the count became an involuntary reflex. It was a searing mark on his meticulously crafted summer. The pool, a modest 9-foot-wide above-ground setup, was meant to be his oasis, a private, cool escape from the relentless coastal humidity. Instead, it had become a flashing, chlorinated beacon for Karen's 2 children, Liam and Maya. They were loud, relentless, and treated the 6-foot privacy fence separating their yards as a minor inconvenience, scaling it with the speed and agility of desperate young monkeys. The latest offense, just yesterday, had been the worst. Liam, the 10-year-old with the perpetually sticky hands and the voice like a siren, had launched himself from the fence top directly into the pool, drenching Ethan, who had been reading a paperback on his deck chair. The paperback, a valuable first edition of a modern thriller, was now ruined, warped, and bled through with pool water. That was the line. Ethan didn't shout. He didn't even stand up immediately. He just slowly closed the sodden book, the pages tearing slightly as they stuck together. He walked into his house, changed his clothes, and made 2 calls. The first was to the police, asking for clarification on trespassing laws. The second was to a local construction and hauling service. The next morning, armed with legal clarity and grim resolve, Ethan walked around the fence to Karen's front yard. The yard was what Ethan privately called controlled chaos, a thin carpet of brown grass, several broken plastic toys, and a wind chime that was pitched half a tone too high. Karen opened the door before he could knock, her face a mask of practiced, brittle pleasantness. She was wearing an oversized t-shirt and yoga pants, clutching a mug with a slogan about mom life. "Ethan, hi. You look stressed," she chirped, leaning against the doorframe, making no move to invite him in. "Karen, we need to talk about Liam and Maya. This has to stop," Ethan said, keeping his voice level, refusing to let the emotion he felt, a boiling mix of frustration and indignation, break through. "I've tried being polite, I've tried talking to you, but your children were in my pool, uninvited, again yesterday. They damaged property." Karen sighed, a long, exaggerated sound that implied she was the one being inconvenienced. "Oh, Ethan, please." "They're just kids. It's summer. They're bored. They don't see a fence, they see an invitation. I mean, you have a pool. It's hot. What are they supposed to do? They're supposed to stay in their own yard. It is my private property. Trespassing is illegal. I shouldn't have to explain basic concepts of property rights to a grown adult, Karen. And you shouldn't be so dramatic about a little dip," she countered, her smile tightening. "I can reimburse you for the chlorine. Or honestly, you should be flattered. It's good for them to swim. Think of it as community outreach." Ethan felt a strange calm settle over him, the kind that precedes an unavoidable catastrophe. He saw the brick wall of her entitlement, polished smooth by years of self-justification. There would be no compromise, no apology, no change in behavior. "No, Karen, I won't be reimbursed for the chlorine. I won't think of it as outreach. I will think of it as the end of this situation," Ethan stated, his voice dropping to a low, cold timbre that finally wiped the forced pleasantness off her face. "If they trespass one more time, I will call the police and I will press charges. Furthermore, I am done asking. I am removing the pool." Karen stared at him, her mouth slightly agape, a slow, predatory calculation entering her eyes. She actually laughed, a short, sharp burst of disbelief. "You're going to get rid of your own pool because my kids used it? That's petty, Ethan. Pathetic, even. It is my property and it is my right to remove it. Consider it the consequence of months of negligence on your part." He didn't wait for her reply. Turning and walking back to his yard, the sound of her frustrated, high-pitched mutterings fading behind him. The next 48 hours were a blur of back-breaking wet labor. Ethan had the construction crew scheduled for the following Monday, but he couldn't wait. He bought a massive sump pump and spent the entirety of Saturday draining the thousands of gallons of water. The rhythmic hum of the pump was a soundtrack to his liberation. He worked in plain sight. He wanted Karen to see it. He wanted Liam and Maya to watch their summer oasis disappear, gallon by slow, deliberate gallon. On Sunday morning, the pump finished its job, leaving a thin, muddy film on the pool liner. Ethan started dismantling the steel frame, hauling the heavy metal poles and the tough vinyl lining into a neat, sad-looking pile where the sparkling water used to be. The quiet was immediate and profound. It felt like the background hum of his life, the constant low-level anxiety of being watched, of waiting for the splash, had been physically removed. He sat on his deck, finally relaxing, the sun setting, casting long shadows across the empty concrete pad. He felt relief, yes, but also a deep sense of loss. He had sacrificed his enjoyment, his privacy, and his $500 pool just to regain the most basic right, control over his own home. Just as the last hint of orange bled from the sky, a figure appeared at the property line. It was Karen. She wasn't wearing the yoga pants now. She was in a pressed denim shirt and a severe, high ponytail. Ethan waited, ready for the inevitable. Final verbal assault, the accusations of being a monster, a cruel neighbor. Karen looked from the empty space where the pool had been, to the pile of dismantled metal and then back to Ethan. There was no anger on her face, no sadness, just a cold, utterly empty expression that chilled him more than any shout could have. "You really did it, huh?" she said, the words barely audible, spoken with an unnerving calm. "Yes, Karen, I did." She nodded slowly, her lips curling into a smile, not the forced pleasantness from Friday, but a true knowing smile devoid of humor. It was the smile of someone who had just been given the necessary data to solve a difficult equation. She then raised her hand, not to gesture at him, but to wave, a casual dismissive motion, toward the street. "I told you they were bored, Ethan. You took away their water. That's fine. But now we have a different problem, don't we?" Ethan turned his head, following her gaze to the street. A pair of headlights, large and square, were approaching, moving slowly, the sound of a heavy-duty engine cutting through the evening quiet. The vehicle stopped directly in front of her house. It wasn't a family car. It was a massive commercial flatbed truck, professionally lettered. And bolted to the flatbed under a tarp being expertly secured was not a pool. It was a structure, large, wooden, and unmistakable. Ethan felt the blood drain from his face as he realized what he was looking at. The truck driver, a man built like a cinder block, climbed out of the cab and exchanged a brief, firm handshake with Karen. Karen watched Ethan across the empty space of the lawn, the triumphant glint finally returning to her eyes. She didn't have to yell anymore. Her new problem, his problem, had just arrived. "You wanted privacy, Ethan," she called out, loud enough for him to hear. "I wanted space for my children to play. Welcome to the new neighborhood. This is my permanent solution." And with a loud hydraulic hiss, the truck bed began to tilt. The hydraulic hiss ceased with a heavy metallic clang, and the flatbed truck settled. Ethan's deck, moments ago an oasis of peace, now felt like a front-row seat to his own defeat. The structure wasn't merely a playhouse. It was a fortress, a wooden monstrosity painted a jarring, cheerful lime green and bright purple. It was 3 stories high, complete with a shingled roof, a rope ladder, 2 swinging bridges, and, most damningly, a turret observation deck capped with a faux pirate flag. It was placed, Ethan realized with a sickening lurch, at the absolute rear corner of Karen's lot, directly against the shared privacy fence, and more critically, exactly adjacent to Ethan's meticulously maintained perennial garden and the oversized window of his home office. The man built like a cinder block, the driver, gave a final nod to Karen, who was still smiling that cold, victorious smile. Within minutes, he and another worker, using a low-to-the-ground pallet jack and incredible physical force, began pushing the enormous, pre-built structure off the flatbed and across the patchy grass. It moved slowly, a squat wooden tank rolling onto the battlefield. Karen walked over to the fence line, her eyes never leaving Ethan. "It's a multi-use play system," she explained, her voice unnecessarily loud, as if narrating a construction documentary. "I figured since my kids are so bored and now have nowhere to get their energy out, I'd invest in something vertical. You know, to maximize their available space." "You are mocking me," Ethan whispered. The wind knocked out of him not by the expense, but by the sheer, unbridled malice of the act. "I am solving a problem, Ethan. You created a vacuum." I filled it. My backyard, my structure. You took away the pool they could climb into. I gave them a castle they can climb over. The structure finally found its resting place. Its northern face pressed so tightly against the fence that it cast a monolithic shadow that instantly swallowed Ethan's prized hydrangeas. The top turret rose nearly 2 feet higher than the 6-foot fence, offering a perfect, unobstructed view directly into Ethan's second-story office window. That thing is 10 feet tall, Ethan said, pushing himself up, his hands white-knuckled on the deck railing. It blocks the sun to my entire backyard after 4 in the afternoon. Oh, did you need a permit for sun too? Karen countered instantly, her voice dripping with false concern. Because I checked the city ordinances. Anything under 14 feet is considered an accessory structure and requires a standard expedited permit, which I got this morning, while you were still marveling at the mud where your pathetic little pool used to be. Ethan felt a crushing wave of impotence. He had played by the rules, sought legal clarity, and executed his plan with a measured, proportionate response, removing his own property to eliminate the nuisance. Karen had responded by escalating the conflict into architectural warfare. As the workers finished bracing the fort, Liam and Maya, as if summoned by a silent signal, burst out the back door shrieking with delight. They didn't even acknowledge Ethan. Their focus was entirely on their new prize. Liam, the older one, was already scrambling up the rock wall side of the fort. He reached the turret level, a full 2 stories high, in seconds. He stood on the deck, hands on his hips, and peered down over the fence, directly at Ethan. The sheer height advantage made the 10-year-old look like a conquering general. Liam didn't say anything. He just raised his hand, gripped an imaginary microphone, and let out a sound that tore through the evening quiet. It was the high-pitched, guttural, sustained roar of a mountain lion. Ethan flinched as the sound hit him. He could practically feel the vibration in his chest. He has a good set of pipes, doesn't he? Karen said, oblivious or perhaps willfully deaf to the sheer noise pollution. They can play up there all day, Ethan, safe, supervised, and very, very close to your window. I even put in a little speaking tube for them, just in case they need to ask you for the time. Ethan didn't waste another word on her. He spun around, went inside, and slammed his sliding glass door so hard the glass rattled. His first move was panic. He grabbed his laptop, pulled up the city planning portal, and started scouring the zoning code for the R2 single-family residential district. He spent 3 frantic hours digging through setbacks, height restrictions, lot coverage ratios, and neighbor notification laws. Every time he hit a dead end, he could hear the faint, muffled sounds of laughter and the dull thump-thump of children jumping on the structure's floorboards. Karen was right. Everything under 14 feet, 427 meters, was an accessory structure. Setbacks required 3 feet, 0.91 meters, from the property line. She had placed it directly on the fence, but the fence itself was 6 inches, 15 centimeters inside her property line, confirmed by the ancient survey spike Ethan had uncovered earlier in the year. The fort was technically 6 inches from the boundary. Karen had done her homework. Around midnight, defeated, Ethan slumped back in his office chair. The moonlight streaming through his window was now cut in half by a looming, jagged shadow. He felt claustrophobic, suffocated in his own home. He had bought this house for the quiet, for the view of the tall pines beyond Karen's property. Now all he saw was lime green and purple wood and a small tattered pirate flag barely visible in the dark. He tried to distract himself, cleaning up the last of the pool debris outside. He walked to the back corner where the fort towered over his garden. He knelt down next to the fence, running his hand along the bottom edge of the wooden barrier. He noticed something small, embedded in the soil where the new structure met the ground. It was a piece of debris, a stray nail perhaps. He dug around it with a trowel, pulling away the sodden earth where the new shadow never lifted. The realization hit him with the force of an electric shock, a major turning point of pure, cold, analytical triumph. Karen had measured the structure, she had pulled the permit, and she had positioned the main support beams with agonizing precision 6 inches away from the property line, but she hadn't accounted for the gutter extension to protect the new fort's base from rain erosion. A 6-inch wide, bent piece of aluminum guttering had been sloppily added to the fort's lower roof line. It was a functional necessity, but its addition was an afterthought. A poorly executed extension that was not part of the initial plans or the permitted structure. Ethan pulled the trowel back, tracing the edge of the aluminum. He took a flashlight from his pocket, knelt low, and shone the beam directly upward. The thin, bent aluminum extension, dark with morning dew, crossed the invisible boundary. It extended 1.5 inches, 3.8 centimeters, past the legal setback, and 0.9 inches, 2.3 centimeters, onto his side of the property line. It wasn't the giant, illegal structure he had hoped for. It was a single piece of cheap, functional metal. But in the cold, clear light of the flashlight beam, Ethan finally saw his leverage. He didn't need to tear down the whole castle. He just needed a single, irrefutable act of trespass by an unpermitted, non-structural element. Karen had calculated everything perfectly, except for one small, sharp, metal flaw. His defeated slump vanished, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. He was no longer fighting children in a pool. He was fighting Karen on paper, and she had just left a tiny, crucial piece of evidence in his yard. Ethan stood up slowly, the trowel still clenched in his hand. He looked up at the towering, silent wooden bastion, no longer feeling small, but calculating. Karen had brought the war to him with a declaration of architectural nuisance. Now, Ethan knew exactly where to place his first precision counterstrike. He grabbed his phone. He didn't call the police. He called the number for a licensed professional land surveyor. He needed a witness, a stamp, and a photograph, proof that would hold up not in a shouting match, but in a courtroom. The surveyor, Mr. Hayes, arrived precisely at 8 a.m. on Tuesday. Ethan watched him from his kitchen window, sipping coffee that tasted like rust and worry. Mr. Hayes was everything Karen was not, meticulous, quiet, and armed with immutable facts. He wore a high-vis vest over a crisp polo shirt and carried a tripod that looked like a weapon of scientific precision. Ethan met him in the backyard, pointing toward the looming, lime-green structure that now dominated the view. "It's ridiculous, I know," Ethan muttered, gesturing to the pirate flag flapping aggressively in the early morning breeze. Mr. Hayes didn't smile. "My job is to find the official boundary markers, verify the fence line, and document any encroachment onto your parcel. Mr. Thorne, aesthetics are outside my remit." His voice was flat and professional. For the next hour, the only sounds were the quiet thwack of Mr. Hayes driving stakes, the mechanical whir of his total station, and the scratch of his pen on official forms. He found the ancient buried survey spike Ethan had identified, confirming the property line's exact position 6 inches, 15 centimeters, inside Karen's fence posts. The legal gap was confirmed. Ethan led him to the base of the fort. "Here, this gutter extension." It was put in after the main structure was dropped. Mr. Hayes knelt, pulling out a retractable steel tape measure. He lined the tape up with the taut, thin wire marking the exact boundary line. The moment the measurement was complete, he called out the reading to his assistant, who logged the data onto a handheld GPS unit. "Encroachment confirmed," Mr. Hayes stated, without fanfare. 1.5 inches of aluminum fascia crossing parcel line B onto parcel line A. It's a non-structural element, but it is a trespass. Just as Mr. Hayes began setting up a second angle for the photographic evidence, the sliding door of Karen's house burst open. Karen strode across her lawn, barefoot, looking like a tornado in a silk robe. Liam and Maya, sensing high drama, ran to the fort and scaled the rope ladder to the turret, where they had the best view of the impending confrontation. "What in the hell is going on here?" Karen yelled, stopping just short of the fence. Her voice was already edged with manufactured outrage. Ethan stepped forward, planting his feet firmly in his yard. "This is Mr. Hayes, a licensed land surveyor. He's here to establish the exact boundaries of my property and document a current violation." Karen focused her fury on the surveyor. "A violation? You're joking! I have an expedited permit from the city stamped and signed. This structure is 6 inches off the line. You're trespassing on my property, taking pictures." Mr. Hayes, a man who clearly dealt with boundary disputes frequently, didn't even look up. "Ma'am, I am standing in Parcel A, fully within the boundary owned by Mr. Thorne. I am documenting an accessory structure on Parcel B. This is standard procedure following a boundary claim. Get off my property. You can't use that equipment near my home, Karen shrieked. She looked at the total station, mistaking it for a camera, and started waving her arms wildly. I don't consent to being recorded. This instrument takes angular measurements, ma'am, not photographs of you, Mr. Hayes calmly replied, making a note on his clipboard. Behavioral interference noted. We have the data we need, Mr. Thorne. Karen saw the gravity of the moment, the calm professionalism overriding her melodrama. She suddenly changed tactics, forcing a sickly sweet, almost flirtatious tone. Oh, well, perhaps we can sort this out, Mr. Hayes. Just a simple misunderstanding between neighbors, right? Ethan is just a little particular about his flower beds. Maybe if he just trimmed back the soil a little, the issue would be solved. She winked. Ethan stepped in front of Mr. Hayes. The issue is a piece of your unpermitted structure resting on my deeded property. You failed to calculate the overhang. You trespassed. The city doesn't care if it's an inch or a foot, Karen. It's a clear violation of the zoning setback. The color drained from her face as the cold, legal reality sank in. Her careful planning had been undone by 1.5 inches, 3.8 centimeter of cheap aluminum. You petty little man, she spat, the pleasant mask finally crumbling. You'll pay for this. You'll regret wasting my time and my money. Mr. Hayes finished his packing, handed Ethan a business card, and pointedly avoided looking at Karen. The report and certified plat will be emailed to you by close of business today. Mr. Thorne, I suggest you attach it to any formal communication with the city. That afternoon, Ethan didn't hesitate. He prepared 3 documents: the certified survey plat, his original, detailed log of the children's previous trespassing, 146 acts, and a formal complaint letter addressed to the City Planning and Zoning Enforcement Office, citing the specific ordinance violation regarding encroachment onto the setback. He mailed the package via certified return receipt requested mail. He was playing the long game now, using bureaucracy as his shield and weapon. The following morning, the return receipt for the letter was confirmed delivered. Ethan spent the day waiting, fully expecting the immediate furious storm. But the day passed in unnerving silence. Karen stayed inside. The children played quietly on the fort, occasionally muffled shouts replaced by the faint sound of a television. That evening, as Ethan sat in his home office, which now felt less like a workspace and more like a sniper's nest, he noticed a subtle yet deeply unsettling change. The ambient noise from Karen's house was different. It wasn't the usual domestic chaos. It was focused. He glanced up at the menacing lime-green turret that peered into his window. The pirate flag was gone. In its place, tied to the flagpole, was a new banner, a crudely drawn, oversized sign. He stood up, walking closer to the glass. The lettering was enormous, drawn with thick, black marker on a white bedsheet. The sign read, "Watch me work, don't look away, I see you." Ethan's heart began to pound, but that wasn't the worst of it. The wind shifted, causing the bedsheet to flap, and revealing a second line of text, written slightly smaller, but directed with surgical malice. Ask the name of Ethan's employer how much they love their work-from-home employees. Karen hadn't just retaliated against his property. She had gone after his livelihood, mixing the psychological terror of constant surveillance with the real-world threat of professional ruin. The war was no longer contained to their backyards. Karen had just proved she would trespass on his career, too. Ethan didn't sleep. He spent the night pacing his house, the neon green and purple silhouette of the fort a constant, monstrous presence outside his window. The sign, ask the name of Ethan's employer, how much they love their work-from-home employees, was a poisoned arrow aimed directly at his financial security. It wasn't a joke. It was a clear articulation of her understanding of his vulnerability. At 7 a.m., he was on a secured line with Joanna, a corporate counsel who sounded perpetually overworked. Mr. Thorne, I'm reviewing the photographs you sent. This is extreme, Joanna said, her voice tight. The optics of an employee being visibly harassed while remote are challenging. We can't have any documentation surfacing that suggests you aren't able to perform your duties due to home environment issues. I am performing my duties, Ethan insisted, his voice raw with fatigue. She's trying to intimidate me because I filed a legal complaint. She wants me to back down. She's threatening our relationship with you, Ethan. We need you to relocate your workspace immediately. Use the spare bedroom, the basement, anywhere that puts that structure out of visual and audio range. We need this situation resolved, publicly and permanently, within 1 week. If the encroachment isn't removed, we may need to discuss alternative work arrangements. Alternative work arrangements, the corporate euphemism for being forced back into the expensive 40-minute commute, or worse. Karen's threat was working. Ethan moved his entire home office setup, monitors, cables, desktop, and all, into a windowless storage room in the basement. The move took 2 hours and the air was musty and cold. His sense of isolation was immediate and profound. He was safe from Karen's sight, but the emotional cost was high. His first important meeting was a video conference at 10 a.m. 5 minutes into presenting quarterly data, a rhythmic deep thump-thump-thump started, resonating through the floorboards. It sounded like a large drum being struck every few seconds. Ethan muted his mic and looked up, knowing exactly what it was. Liam and Maya were jumping in unison on the main deck of the fort, directly over the spot where his office had been. The sound wasn't loud enough to register on a sound meter, but it was perfectly designed to pierce the psychological barrier of his home. The harassment had gone from visual surveillance to targeted sonic disruption. He tried to ignore it, focusing on the screen, but his presentation faltered. He was stumbling, waiting for the next thump, his heart pounding in his chest in time with the noise. Just as the meeting ended, his phone rang. It was an unrecognized number, but the area code was local. "Mr. Thorne, this is Ms. Ramirez, zoning enforcement officer for the city. I have your file and the certified survey. Very detailed work. I'll be out at your property at 2:30 p.m. this afternoon to perform a site verification." A surge of relief, cold and sharp, cut through the dread. Finally, bureaucracy was moving. At 2:25 p.m., Ethan stood on his back deck, waiting. Karen, alerted by the change in atmosphere, emerged from her house. She was dressed like a suburban martyr, simple white t-shirt, sunglasses, and a posture of aggrieved innocence. The sign still fluttered from the turret, a bizarre flag of psychological warfare. Ms. Ramirez arrived, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in a khaki uniform. Ethan greeted her, presenting the official envelope containing the survey. "The encroachment is here. Ms. Ramirez. 1.5 inches, 3.8 centimeters of gutter fascia crossing the setback line," Ethan explained, pointing with his pencil. Karen stomped over to the fence. "This is ridiculous. This man is obsessed. It's one piece of flashing. I pulled a permit. He had a pool that was attracting rodents, and now he's harassing me for giving my kids a safe place to play." Ms. Ramirez ignored Karen completely, focused solely on the task. She unfurled a bright orange surveyor's tape. She located the property line on Ethan's side using the markers verified by Mr. Hayes and extended the tape up the side of the wooden structure. Karen began to pace. "I will adjust it. I'll get a new contractor. You don't have to do all this paperwork for a piece of aluminum, ma'am. It's a neighbor dispute, and this man is making it worse." Ms. Ramirez, however, did not stop. She meticulously measured 3 points along the base and then moved to the side. She paused at the offending gutter. The orange tape measure pressed against the aluminum lip. "Violation confirmed," Ms. Ramirez announced calmly, addressing Ethan. "The 1.5-inch, 3.8 cm protrusion of the gutter system violates Section D of 4C of the accessory structure code. It constitutes an encroachment onto the adjacent property and violates the required 3-foot, 0.91 meter, setback." She pulled a clipboard and began writing. Ethan felt a moment of pure, blinding satisfaction. He had won. The legal high ground was his, but Karen wasn't finished. As Ms. Ramirez moved to place the official notice on the structure, Karen lunged for the fence gate, her eyes wild. She didn't try to stop the officer. Instead, she reached into the soil near the fort's base and pulled out a large, heavy landscaping brick. "This whole thing is coming down, Ethan," she snarled, her voice a low, terrifying growl. "But if you want to play dirty, let's see how much you like cleaning up after me." Before Ethan could react, Before Ms. Ramirez could even turn around, Karen took the brick and hurled it with terrifying force, not toward Ethan, but high into the air, over the fence. It crashed through the glass of Ethan's ground-floor living room window, followed by a sound that wasn't glass shattering, but liquid spraying. The smell of raw sewage, thick and nauseating, instantly assaulted their senses. Karen hadn't just thrown a brick. She had aimed for the large, exposed clean-out pipe for Ethan's main sewer line, located just inside the window frame. The pipe, weakened by years of sun and already stressed, had burst from the impact. A thick, dark torrent of sewage was now pooling rapidly in Ethan's living room. Ms. Ramirez, horrified, dropped her clipboard. Ethan didn't even look at her or Karen. The sight, the smell, the immediate, devastating destruction of his indoor sanctuary. It was a blow that transcended property lines or ordinances. That is criminal destruction of property and vandalism, ma'am. Ms. Ramirez finally yelled, reaching for her radio. Karen, standing behind the fence, breathing heavily, just pointed at Ethan's house, a manic, triumphant terror in her eyes. The sign on the fort mocked him. She had turned his victory into an immediate catastrophic emergency. Go ahead, Ethan. File another complaint. See how long it takes them to clean up your mess. Ethan was frozen, staring at the dark flood filling his home. He had won the battle for 1.5 inches of aluminum, and Karen had just responded by dumping human waste into his entire life.